Welcome back, folks. This is Officer Peterson with the Port Orange Police Department for our second episode of the Orange Juice Podcast. Joining me as my co-host today is Detective Fischetti, and our guests are Nate and Kim Ingram. They are, well, one, a wealth of knowledge. Nate has been in the business for over 25 years, and Kim has also been in the business for over 25 years. Today we're going to kind of cover mental health and law enforcement, and I couldn't think of any better guests to have than these two. So would you guys mind introducing yourselves?
Sure. Ladies first.
So, as Officer Peterson said, my name's Kim Ingram. I'm a licensed mental health counselor here in the state of Florida. I'm also a certified first responder counselor, and I specialize in working with first responders and specifically law enforcement. Nate and I have been married 28 years now. And for 26-ish of those 28 years, he's been in law enforcement. We also have a son who's in law enforcement.
26 or 28?
I don't know.
It's 28 or 28.
Something like that, whatever.
Well, who's counting after
we
all
have
this
a
time?
son who's in law enforcement as well in the area. He's working on his 8th year. So with that, I kind of went into the specialty of first responders, and that's what I do full time during the week. We own a private mental health practice here, actually in Port Orange, not too far from City Hall. We have 11 therapists who work for us. They all have other specialties. I'm the only one who works with public safety professionals.
Well, I guess it's my turn.
There you go.
This is Nate Ingram. It's such a pleasure to be back in the city of Port Orange in the government offices. I've been a law enforcement officer in the state of Florida since 1997. Back when I went to the academy, we trained with Colt revolvers and red horses. So, it's great to be in modern law enforcement these days. But no, in all seriousness, I did work in law enforcement for a long time, and most recently with the city of Port Orange as a police officer. And it's great to be back, to see friends like you, Officer Peterson, Investigator Fischetti. Good to see you guys. And this is an important topic. Officer Peterson and I were talking about this before we actually started on the tape about some of the changes in law enforcement over the years. And, the recognition of mental health is probably the biggest one that we've seen in our time in law enforcement. From when I started in law enforcement, you didn't talk about feelings or emotions or anything like that as a law enforcement officer, because people would look at you like, well, you're soft or you're nuts or something's wrong with you, and you'd be ostracized within your patrol or your platoon, and that was awful. And so the fact that we're sitting here today on a podcast talking about mental health in law enforcement is just astounding, considering how far we've come.
For sure. Like you said, 28 years in law enforcement, that's a long time. That's a great career. And as you said, Kim, you have the same 28 years. So Nate and I were kind of talking about, you guys got married, and you said 2 days later you were in the academy going.
Yeah,
so
literally.
You've had the same experiences as him. You've been able to help him through those 28 years. And in my short time in law enforcement, even I have seen kind of that turn towards, hey, even cops have things that they have to get off their chest. They're not, we're not bulletproof. We're not made of steel.
No, we're not robots.
Yeah, things bother us.
Absolutely.
So I think it's fantastic that not only do we have therapists who can help us through that, but we also have therapists who specialize in that, who know what to look for and know how to respond. Because sometimes you kind of feel that. You go and you talk to someone, and they try and help you, but they just don't know the experiences. Mm-hmm. They don't know what you're feeling. They haven't seen what you've seen. So to have someone who has had 28 years of experiences is a great thing. Yeah. So I as an officer appreciate the ability to go to someone who can help me through stuff like that.
And that's probably one of the biggest barriers to treatment that we see in the mental health side of this is the fear of not knowing what to expect when you do go to a therapist. And I'll let Kim talk about this because she's the expert on it, but she actually teaches a block in the local academies about this very thing, about what does therapy look like for a law enforcement officer. I mean, do you sit down in the office and you drink mint tea and sing Kumbaya, or do we get down to business and we actually handle what happened? And she has developed a great technique for overcoming that. I mean, we don't want to talk to people about our emotions. I mean, we're big, tough robots. We carry all this stuff and this armor, and we're expected to go into these scenes, handle whatever we just saw, and then go on about our business. And it's interesting because in our work and what we've been able to do around the country at some of the seminars that we've been to is to talk with other professionals who are experiencing the same thing. And so for a law enforcement officer, I guess the first thing that we need to recognize is we're not the only ones that experience something on a call. Whether it's a death or a child abuse or something that just shocks the conscience, we need to know that it's not just us that was bothered by what we just saw. And it's okay to not be okay with the things that we just experienced. I mean, it's not normal to see somebody's internal organs on the outside.
That's for sure.
Kind of abnormal, right?
Yep.
We're expected to deal with that. And then if we're not the primary officer on that call, we then go on to our next call, which could be grandma's cat's in the tree and she can't get it down. And we get there and we're still traumatized by what we just cleared, but these people are now expecting officer friendly. So we have to package all of this emotion up that we just experienced, set it to the side, and then be officer friendly for this person. And then we get the cat out of the tree, and then the next call is a barricaded subject or something else. So we're constantly changing those gears and moving from one traumatic scene to another, and we never effectively deal with that. And so with the younger kids, they go home, they play Call of Duty, they drink Bang, none of which is healthy, And so what Kim does is she helps us unpack that and deal with all of that stored trauma. And I said before, when I started in 97, we would deal with stuff and just have to literally set it aside forever because we couldn't go home and talk to our spouses. They didn't recognize it. We couldn't talk to other people on our shift because those are all grumpy guys that have been around forever, and they definitely didn't talk about their feelings. But the one big change that we've seen is a younger generation coming into law enforcement. The newer culture recognizes emotions and the need for therapy and coaching and things like that. So that's probably one of the other big changes in the profession is the new generation coming in recognizes that it's okay to have feelings.
Yeah, and I definitely, I'm glad that that's a change that has come around. And like you said, like Kim, if you can just explain kind of that in those 28 years, the change that you've seen, like you said, Nate has been in for 28 years and now your son is coming up on year 8. Maybe those changes that you've seen from when Nate first started to when your son first started, how that has kind of differed.
I think the biggest change is that there's actually conversation about it now. And when Nate first started, you never heard anything about mental health in law enforcement. It was, you good?
Oh, good. I'm good.
And then you just moved on. It's a talked about subject now. It's a very slow turn in Florida right now. The trajectory has just started to change. In some of the other areas of our country, it's a little further forward. But Florida is just starting to have this conversation and recognize that cops, law enforcement, first responders in general are seeing things that aren't normal. Most people who live a lifetime experience 2 to 3 traumatic events in their life. The average law enforcement officer who does 20 years at their department experiences somewhere between 600 and 800. So what we've learned in my field is traumatic events stack. So you go to one, you put that in a box, you shove it in a closet, it's all duct taped up so it doesn't try and escape. But then you go to the next one and it gets put in a box and stuffed in that closet. Well, you can only fill a closet so much before it busts open and it all falls out on the floor. And that's what we see happen with our law enforcement officers is the you good mentality. So they just shove all this trauma in the back closet somewhere. And then suddenly one day they may be just on a traffic stop and they get back in their car and they go, something's wrong with me. And I don't understand what's happening right now, because what they just went through wasn't a traumatic event, but it's the stacking of all that trauma through all those years and not properly processing and dealing with it that causes it to all fall out.
And, again, kind of in my time in the past 3 years, I've seen that shift. I've seen when you're going through field training, the older field training officers who have been here for a while, who have all that knowledge, a lot of them still carry that you good mentality because that's just what they're accustomed to. But as time has gone on and some younger officers move into field training, they start to understand, like, hey, not only are you a human, but you're brand new to this. So in my second phase of field training, I went to a shooting where a 19-year-old kid got shot. Well, I'm only 21 when this happens. So for me to see someone who's only 2 years younger than me lose their life, that's going to stick with you. That's there forever. You're not getting rid of that. And the field training officer I had at the time was good about it, just kind of running me through it like, hey, here's what we're going to. Prepare yourself mentally. You're going to see some stuff. And then just kind of working through it after. And I think that's so important that you surround yourself with people who not only have the ability to see that something is clearly not right with you, but to work you through it and kind of bring you back to earth. So I'm glad that in my time here we've seen that change, and I'm glad that as new officers come in, we are getting more people who can help them with that.
Sure.
It's super interesting because I have the privilege of being in the local academy classes, in the sheriff's office academy classes, but I've also been in some in-service classes as well. I was in your in-service hostage negotiations class.
Correct.
And the difference is almost night and day between being with some of those fresh recruits who are so young and they're very open to mental health conversations, and then standing in front of a class of seasoned officers. Typically I call them old dog officers with
hey,
what I'm sitting between right now between these two. But these seasoned officers who you can see the skepticism and I'm not going to talk to this lady. I'm not even going to say hi to this lady because she's going to write something down about me, and then they're going to take my gun and my badge. And so it's two
might catch feelings.
completely different mentalities in those two different segments that I go teach in.
Exactly. And kind of to touch on that, in that training, you get some of these people who have been with their departments for a long time, and some of them come from a little more rigid departments where they see more of those, traumatizing events. And you can tell that kind of the coping mechanism becomes humor. It's like everything's a joke. Like, because if I don't joke, it becomes serious. And if it becomes serious, I start to feel it. If I start to feel it, they're going to take my gun and my badge, and I'm not going to. And I think that mindset just has to change. It has to become hey, I'm allowed to not feel like myself. That's okay, because there are people out here who want to help me feel like myself again.
Yeah. In law enforcement, we're all about training. We love the new gadget comes out. We want to learn how to use that tool. The new fighting technique comes out. We want to learn that. We go to strength coaches to make ourselves better. We go to firearms instructors to learn how to shoot. I've never understood why we don't go to a mental health professional to train our minds to be resilient so we can stay in the fight. We just expect to be born tough. And unfortunately, and I hate to break this to everyone out there, we're not all born tough. We all have innate weaknesses. Different things will affect us differently. Officer Peterson, you could go to a call that just totally blows you out of the water, and I'm headed to Chili's later for a chili pub. Vice versa, we go to a different type of call, and I'm just wrecked because I've been to so many different child abuse cases that this last one just finally pushed me over the edge. And you're like, well, what? They were just yelling at the kid. It's a big deal. It's child abuse, but I don't understand why you're so affected. Different things affect us differently, and we need to be able to recognize that. And I think for a lot of times, as law enforcement officers, we're our own worst enemy because we expect everybody to just suck it up and deal with it. And really, it affects us all, whether we want to recognize it or not. And so, in dealing with therapy, you go to a therapist for two different reasons. First of all, you're experiencing something that you don't understand and you want to get some help for that, or you're being proactive and you're learning tools to prepare yourself to deal with that in the moment. Because, let's face it, the academy doesn't prepare us for the things that we see. Our FTOs don't prepare us for the things we see. And so better now with, like you said, about them recognizing that emotion is a real thing. But when I went through it, our FTOs were the hardest FTOs you could find because they wanted to test the recruit to see if they could make it. They literally would throw you into stuff just to see what would happen. And so we're setting our people up to fail because we're not properly or adequately training them. And so I would encourage guys and girls to go out there and find a therapist that understands what they're doing and learn some techniques just for dealing with the trauma, because otherwise we have horrible coping techniques for that. We all know people that have been in the industry who have alcohol problems. I personally had a sergeant who was the best sergeant I've ever had outside of Port Orange. So you guys there at Port Orange, I still love you. But this guy, he was a mentor. He was very proactive at the agency. Everybody looked up to him. He was like the officer of the year 2 years in a row. I mean, just everything you would expect about a police officer. He became a sergeant, great sergeant to work for, remembered where he came from, all the things. But then he started showing up, his uniform was 2 days old, his boots were a little dirty, may or may not have had a little bit of beer on his breath when he showed back up to work. Well, this is in the early 2000s. There's none of this talk, remember, about mental health or anything like that. We didn't know how to help our brother. And so we were doing that, hey man, sober up before you come in, or here's some mints or something like that, and then we'd have to go drag him out of bed to come to shift. And we're all trying to give him tough love, but we didn't have the resources available to be able to help this guy out. And we watched him sail right off a cliff and he killed himself. This great police officer, this longtime sergeant, this model of the agency, couldn't handle his demons, and we couldn't help him because we didn't have the tools. And so that's, for us, that's the motivation for Kim and I, is perhaps maybe we can help somebody out there. We can stop that. We can bring him back in off the cliff and not just salvage the career, but more importantly, salvage the person. Because you have this guy or girl that's been a great public servant for all of these years, and because of the impact of the job, has now put himself at a point or herself at a point where they're making really bad decisions. And we've been fortunate enough to where, with what Kim does, she teaches at the academies, and she tells them, one of the last things she says is, hey, make one more call. One more call. Let me be that last call if you decide you're going to end your life. And I'll let her tell you about it, but we were able to talk a kid down off a ledge and get him help before he pulled the trigger. And the supervisor that I had on the phone while Kim was on with this guy calls me back later and says, you definitely saved his life. He had the 9mm. He was actually going to do it.
I think that, when I go talk at these classes, it's important because the buzzword is, in my profession, is culturally competent. You want your therapist to be able to at least have a good understanding of your background and where you're coming from. And usually when we talk about cultural competency, we're talking about an ethnicity type thing or something like that. But it's beyond important when we talk about law enforcement officers, because you sit down with a therapist, and detective here comes in and he's sharing about this awful case with child abuse and all these things that he's working on. And so often I have officers sit down and they're like, I was telling this therapist about this investigation I'm doing, and she started crying. And you tell me, are you going to keep talking about that case?
That's not a good sign, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's not a good sign.
You're going to stop talking because in your mind, you've just traumatized your therapist of all people. I've had people talk about a therapist getting up, running out of the room. I can't see you, and literally leaving the cop sitting there on the couch. So when we talk about the cultural competence, there's a lot of things that I do differently compared to other therapists to have that competency and that understanding and try and build that trust. One of the main things is we just moved offices. We have a new office here in Port Orange. And I have what I call the super secret squirrel entrance that is just a door specifically for law enforcement where they don't have to sit in the lobby with somebody they arrested the day before or even just wrote a ticket to.
Makes for awkward conversation, I'll tell you that.
Right.
It does.
Yeah.
You know, the last
you
thing
don't trade recipes with that person.
the last thing you want to do is walk in to see your therapist and have to sit in the lobby next to the lady that you wrote a speeding ticket in a school zone.
Give them the
for.
old, how about them Mets, huh?
Yeah.
Hey.
That's a good point, though. I never really.
Yeah.
So there's a different door with a different waiting room that is literally right outside the door of my office where all my cops come and sit. You know, it's things like scheduling carefully, where if I had the two of you coming to see me, I don't schedule you two back to back. I try my best to be, you know, one Port Orange guy on Monday, one Port Orange gal on Thursday, or at least in the morning and the afternoon and things like that.
And that can be tough because, you know, with all the agencies joined together, the way our community is designed, you know, it's possible, but, you know, we try and space it out to where that's not. But, you know, touching on what you said about being culturally competent, one of the things that is really great about what she does is she understands the language. You know, we talk a different language than the citizens do, and rightfully so. I mean, not talking about 10 codes and signals.
Let's just say I could have a full conversation with numbers.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
you'll know exactly what I mean.
So great side story about that, not to Ricky Bobby on you, but we use 10 codes and signals with our kids up until now. It doesn't work with our son who's a police officer now. He's like, Dad, stop. We use plain speech now. But, you know, we have our own language. We talk about shift work or some of the slang terms that we have, you know, and I'm not going to get into some of those slang terms, but, you know, just talking about cars or professions or whatever, and she's able to instantly have buy-in because she understands it. She gets it when she talks about being held over or having to work a detail or, you know, start talking about the more technical things about it. And so that creates that layer of trust. Now, Kim will tell you, it's hard to get in the backside of the wall with a law enforcement officer because we're so used to people keeping people away. You know, when they talk about the reactionary gap, it's huge when you start talking about mental issues because of that fear. First of all, if I open up and I tell her I'm angry and I'm having issues at home, what if my agency finds out? So one of the things that we did to get around things like that is we have a private practice that doesn't take health insurance. Well, why do we not take health insurance? Because when you use your city employee health insurance, it's reported back to your employer, and they require a diagnosis. So you can see where that would lead. You know, if I'm going to a therapist because I have severe anger issues from all this trauma I've seen, and that's reported back to the employer's experience, then that could lead to another issue for me down the road where suddenly I have an anger issue that was documented. But being in private practice, we don't have to do that. And so people can feel comfortable. We can be open about all the things that are going on. Whereas if you're referred through an EAP therapist or things like that, not saying that those are bad, but just there's not that guarantee of security, of confidentiality. And so we want to make sure that for our law enforcement officers that they're 100% comfortable. I mean, we even put a special entrance in because, you know, we all want to be special with special entrances.
Does it blend in with the brick wall so you can't even tell it's there? You have to knock twice and it opens. And
Well, it's platform 9 3/4, in case you're wondering.
yeah.
So,
I feel like Batman when you walk through.
right, a waterfall, you go through the cave.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Come in soaking wet. The waterfall didn't turn off.
Yeah, well, that'd be me.
It's funny because when we opened this new office and my therapists were kind of walking around looking at the new place, they walk around, it's got like a U shape with all the offices off of it. And they walk around to the back and they're like, what's this couch for? I'm like, some of my clients, they're like, well, why aren't they sitting in the lobby? Because they're cops.
Yeah.
Like they don't want to sit with other people.
You're asking too many questions.
Yes,
Yeah,
like-
yeah. Let me get Miranda real quick,
Yeah.
okay? We'll be right back.
Yeah.
So
But, you know, we get a little serious there for a moment, but, you know, when it comes to mental health and law enforcement, it doesn't have to be. You know, I was talking with a gentleman this morning about another agency outside of our community who, whenever there's a critical incident, an OIS or something like that, they send the officers home on admin leave and they don't follow up with them. They just send them off on the island and there's no follow-up. They don't call them. It's, you know, you just had an officer experience the most traumatic incident they've ever done. And let's be honest, having to discharge your weapon at a citizen is going to be the most traumatic event you've ever had, whether it's justified or not talking about that. You know, the act of taking somebody else's life is
It's a heavy
huge.
thing.
And this agency then ships the officers off on their own. Good luck. You know, we'll call you in a week or so. You know, there's no follow-up. And so what does that do to us as law enforcement officers? Well, I must have done something wrong because nobody is talking to me. And once again, it just comes back to we eat our own. We don't want to follow up. We don't want to contact them because suddenly I'm going to be in the IA because I called them and checked on them. All these irrational fears that we have as law enforcement officers come into play. And so, not saying that anything about that here, but I just found that to be phenomenally bad practice. But I know that here at Port Orange, we don't do that because I've followed up with people when I was here who were involved in critical incidents, and they said, hey, so-and-so called and checked on me. Didn't ask me any questions, just wanted to give me a little mental fist bump and let me know that, hey, I'm not forgotten just because I'm out here on the island right now. And, the agency is good about that too, because I know Captain Brosio does that. And so that builds that sense of community for us and it kind of pumps us up. Back in the day, once again, that's not something we would do because we don't want to jeopardize our own careers by looking out for you. You get sent home for something, see you when you come back, and that's bad for us. So, just talking about some of the things that have changed over the years. Obviously, the technology is different. You have the external carriers now where guys like to tuck their hands in. I mean, what a great parking space for your hands right there at the top of the vest. Yeah. Just kidding. Don't do that. That's horrible. But we do have all this great new gear. I mean, body-worn cameras. Excellent. Love it. Unfortunately, public has unrealistic expectations because they expect that little camera to be like a movie theater video where they see every detail in fine print and 3D rewinds.
They want 4K.
It's got to be 4K. And I want the 3D model. That's great because, maybe it captures a detail we missed. We can go back and we give it an investigations. They see something that we missed on patrol or, heaven forbid, if an officer is assaulted, then we have a video record of that. And, we see the interaction. Unfortunately, sometimes we do pay the ultimate price. And sometimes the cameras do save our at least the record of what happened and we can move from there. But, everything from the quality of our boots to our undershirts. When I first started in law enforcement, we were still wearing Hanes T-shirts, the cotton T-shirts. So my daughter hated those things. And here's why, because I'm working day shift. I just got stuck on a 12-hour shift working a detail where I end up working construction. I'm standing in the road doing all of this stuff in 95-degree heat. I don't have Under Armour on. I had that old nasty Hanes T-shirt. Well, I would come home and chase her around the house with that thing because that thing weighed like 15 pounds. But, now we have Under Armour. Or, things like that, the moisture wicking stuff.
Dry fit technology.
Yeah. We don't have to worry so much about dying in the heat in a cotton T-shirt or a polyester uniform. Yeah. Our agency, Port Orange, was forward thinking enough to get the external carriers, the cool shirts. Once again, just ways that the job has improved. When I first started, the agency I was at would take the AM, FM radios out of the car because they wanted us to focus on the stereos. We weren't allowed to run the AC in the cars during the day.
No fun.
We had to
no fun allowed.
Oh, no fun at all. I mean, just straight seriousness. Talk about deprivation of mental health. I mean, my gosh, it was horrible. But, just where we are now is a lot better. And I would hope that the guys and girls that are still on the road today would take advantage of the tools that are out there. If you can't shoot, find a firearms instructor. Port Orange is great about that. You get the range days. I mean, if they're going to give me free ammo, I'm going to go shoot it up. But if you have trouble, find an instructor. Same thing goes for mental health. And I can't stress this enough. Don't try and do it on your own. Get backup. That's what we're here for, to help you through that, to help strengthen the mind so you can deal with the trauma you're going to see on the road. My first traffic crash when I first got into law enforcement was a fatality. I'd known the victim since he was a baby. And I'm the first one on scene, and this guy that was a football player had hit a school bus head on, not wearing a seatbelt, doing 60 miles an hour. So you can imagine what it looked like. I get there, and he's obviously deceased. And so I check on the other people. There's a couple kids on the bus, didn't hurt the bus. They were just shaking up. But then I get the mom that I'd known for a long time. And I have to tell her son's dead on the side of the road. And that was my first call in law enforcement. Nothing had prepared me, to deal with somebody I know who's right there in the middle of the road, dead, and then to interact with the mother at her worst period. So I'm dealing with the emotions of this kid that I've known forever, and then I have to set all of that aside and then deal with mom who's having the worst day of her life. So it's things like that we're expected just to experience and never see somebody like him about. We're big, tough officers.
Know how to handle straight out the gate.
Yeah.
There you go.
And I think it's important to say that because law enforcement officers get so proficient at turning off their emotions when they're working, that eventually that starts to channel into the home life. And when you have a significant other, when you have a spouse, when you have kids, the last thing that you need to do is seclude yourself from your emotions in your home life, because now all of a sudden kids don't want to be around you. Why are they getting cop parent all the time? Wife, husband is definitely not happy because you're supposed to show that person some kind of emotion. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go home and talk about all the things that happened in your day and give all the gruesome details, but you need to be able to at least express the normal range of emotion in your personal life. And it's possible to learn how to do that, to be the cop who can make the critical decisions when you're working, but also still be the human when you're at home, and not that superhero that we expect as a society from our law enforcement.
I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think, one thing that a lot of cops have to remember, it's a job, right? Now, it's a job that you form your life around, and like you said, you get this brotherhood that lasts a lifetime, and they become your people. It's your second family. I've only been here 3 years, but I tell all these new people, you will spend, because we work half the month and 12-hour days, you will spend a quarter of your life with these people. A quarter of your life, a quarter of life's big events, a quarter of birthdays, a quarter of everything you will spend with these people. And they are your family. And sometimes we don't like our family, but at the end of the day, it's just a job. And if this job is really eating into you that much, you got to be able to find someone that you can talk to and help work through it. And whether it be you go see a counselor who, again, understands what you're going through, and that's their specialty, that's their niche. And after seeing that counselor, maybe then you can start opening up to your spouse, because you realize, hey, even though my spouse may not understand, they're still my person. They still will be able to empathize with me and kind of work me through it at home, which I think is so important just in your day-to-day life. Because you see that counselor once a week, once a month. You see that spouse every night.
Hopefully.
And,
Right.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
And that's a lot of what I do with my law enforcement officers, is teach them, how do you communicate effectively at home? What are changes you can make at home that make life easier? I see couples, I see spouses, and work with everybody to try and go, look, here's some minor changes that could be made that are going to make your home life much more pleasurable than what it is right now, because everybody's miserable, and we don't want that.
And we're a prime example of that. When I first got into law enforcement, you guys know I'm proactive. When I worked the road, well, I was like 110% all the time. And I would come home and I'm still, ready to go, ready to rock. And she's not. I'm coming home barking orders, expecting things to be done, telling it how it is. And she goes, I don't know who you think you are here. I mean, we need to talk about that. We ended up in counseling because our marriage was headed to divorce. And what I had to learn is I needed to learn how to turn it off when I got home, which is very important to all these young guys. They need to understand that. Turn it off when you get home. And then I need to learn how to talk to my wife. And, it took a little while. And I'm not the smartest fella. I tend to be slow on occasion. Last year, I actually sat down with her and I said, I never realized how hard it was for you to watch me go out the door in uniform. It never dawned on me. For me, I'm just putting on my gear, I'm going to work, go play with some bad guys tonight, kick butt, take names. She had to watch a patrol car leave the yard. And what it took for me was watching my kid gear up, get in his patrol car, and leave my driveway. And I'm watching him drive out, knowing what he's driving into, and having an epiphany. Holy crap. Yeah. I did this to her for years and never stopped to think about the effect it may have. So, and it's a two-way street. I mean, we need spouses that are supportive of us and what we do, and it's a hard profession on the family. We're gone 25% of the time. Officer Peterson, you nailed it on the head. I'm like, go, man, you got it, because that's exactly it. And I had a supervisor at the time, so far ahead of his time, I was that guy. I came to work. My gear was dirty. My uniform was a couple days old. I wasn't in a bottle yet, but it was headed there. He pulled me into his office and he goes, "Hey," he says, "what's going on at home?" I'm like, "Nothing, LT. What's up?" You know, it was day shift. I was out there stroking tickets. I mean, having a good time. He goes, "No, what's going on at home?" I'm like, "Nothing, sir. We're good." And he goes, "Shut the door. Sit down in a chair right there." I'm like, "All right, I'm still bopping around, ready to go." He goes, "Look," he said, "I've been married 3 times at this point." Now, he's since been married 2 more times, so apparently he didn't take his own advice. But, I mean, great guy. Captain Charles, if you're out there listening to this, I'm telling your story.
He will be.
He will be, too, I'm sure. If we have one supervisor that marks our career, we all remember him, and this was Bruce Charles. But he told me something that was kind of hokey at the time, and he told me it was going to be, he said, but it's applicable. He said, when I get home from work, I envision a coat rack outside the back door of my house. Just a regular old coat rack. He said, I get out of the patrol car. When I get to the coat rack, I mentally take my hat off, take my uniform shirt off, I hang it all on the coat rack. Gun belt goes on the coat rack. When I go inside, I'm no longer, at the time he was Lieutenant Bruce Charles, I'm just Bruce, or I'm Dad. And he said, now in the mornings, when I get up, go to work, I come out the door, I mentally put on my police hat, put on my uniform, put on my gun belt, and now I'm Lieutenant Bruce Charles. And that's what I was talking about before, about learning how to turn it off when we get home. It's a mental game, but we're all about that, aren't we, in law enforcement? Mental games, whether we're playing mental games with a suspect we're interviewing or we're gearing ourselves up for the day, that whole mental preparedness thing. Not only do we have to put it on in the morning, we just have to remember to turn it off at home, because otherwise our spouses are going to suffer. Nobody likes Officer Ingram, especially not when he rode a motorcycle.
I thought he was pretty cool.
I mean,
liked him.
Yeah, he's
fun
all
guy
right.
to be around.
Yeah.
Officer Peterson, you're welcome to live with Officer Ingram if you would like.
Well, that might be a bit much.
Yeah.
That's
I don't know.
Yeah, at work he was great.
Yeah, a great sense of humor, right? Yeah, especially dealing with people on the road. He wasn't so pleasant at home to deal with. That guy can be difficult, and it's never too late to teach an old dog new tricks, so to speak. And so last year I had that epiphany, and it's just we don't really think about that, about how much the profession changes us over the years. And it came to me, and we'd been through counseling years ago, and thankfully we haven't had to go back because that was excruciating.
Yeah.
But nothing like talking about your weaknesses in front of your wife. Yeah. But in all seriousness, guys, the tools are out there, and the biggest thing, and I can't stress this enough, is do it ahead of time. Don't wait until it's too late. And we tell the new kids this all the time. Don't wait till it's too late to request backup. If you think you need it, you need it. Same thing goes for mental health preparedness. If you think you need it, you need it. And there's nothing wrong with you. It doesn't make you a lesser of an officer. Like I said before, it's no different than getting some professional training for something else. We go to schools to learn how to do traffic stops. We go to schools to learn investigations. I mean, you guys go to so many different schools for all the various crimes. We learn how to be better officers. We need to do that mentally as well, so that way we can stay in the fight when things go south, or when we get home at the end of the day, we can process what we just saw. And Kim can talk to you guys more about different techniques. She actually teaches that as part of her course curriculum at the academies on dealing with stress and dealing with traumatic incidents. Because, let's face it, if we're in an on-duty shooting or things go south really quick, we need to be squared away and be focused, but then be ready to deal with what happens next. Some of the things that we experience after the fact, at 2 a.m. after a shooting, suddenly you start recalling different things, or you experience different things, you recall different smells. I mean, there's so much about it that we don't teach each other on how to respond to that. So that's your cue, honey. That's all you. You know that.
I just think that it is a matter of understanding that you're getting trained in all these different aspects to do your job, but there's nobody who is actually educated and trained in how to teach you to handle it mentally. And it's not difficult to learn some techniques and some tools to help you cope and manage, not only in the moment, you just responded to this call and your stress response, the fight or flight response has kicked in and everything is running on that 110%. But it takes, when that stress chemical dump happens, it takes 12 to 18 hours for that to fully leave your system if you don't do anything to help recover. If you don't know that information, you're working 12-hour shifts as a cop. When exactly are you coming out of stress response? So there's tools and things that you can do to help alleviate some of that stress dump that'll get you out of it. We know it's not healthy to live in a constant stress response. We know all the physical things that it causes, but you're not being taught those things in the academy. You're being taught how to do the job.
Right.
So a culturally competent clinician can help you with those things and teach you. And coming to a therapist doesn't mean that you're coming to me, once a week for the next 15 years of your career. It means you come to me, you learn some things, you try them, and then all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm pretty good. And I go, okay, I don't need to see you. If something happens, send me a text, I'll get you back in.
Yeah.
But otherwise, great, you've learned what you needed, move on.
And I think it's important that we have people who are in that profession that understand, like, I'm not here to make a buck, right? Because, it's not a prescription. This isn't something I'm going to need for the rest of my life. And I think it's so important that we have professionals like yourself who realize, hey, they're better. They're to the point now where I don't need to see them. And if they ever have to come back, then so be it. But right now, it's to the point where they can handle it themselves. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine the pride you take in the work of, hey, I got someone to that point where they don't need me anymore.
Right. And I tell officers and other responders all the time, okay, you may not be seeing me anymore, but if you get into a critical incident and you need to process through what you just saw, send me a text. I will call you. And it doesn't matter what I'm doing. I've been on Disappearing Island before, out on the boat, and gotten a text from a cop who just got into a shooting. And he's like, hey, I just need a few minutes. Okay. So I walked away from my family, said, hey, I got to make a call. I'll be right back. And had a 15-minute conversation. That was all it took to remind him of some techniques and things he'd already learned. And suddenly he was like, you know what? That's right. All right, I'm good. Thanks. And that was the end of it. The other thing that I really want to make super clear is I don't expect people to always want to come see me. Yes, I'm culturally competent. Yes, I would love to see all the cops in Volusia County. I don't have that kind of time because there's a lot of you. But I have a whole list of other culturally competent clinicians. They're out there. They're just hard to find. So if not me, you can always contact me and I'll help you find someone else, because maybe you know Nate too well and you don't want to see his wife. That's fine. I get it. Right?
I mean, if I knew me, I wouldn't want to see her either. So.
Maybe you know my son. Maybe you work with my son and you don't want to see me for that reason. I get it. It's not a big deal. Let me help you find somebody who is actually trained to work with law enforcement.
Yeah. I just want to thank you both for coming in today and talking about this and sharing your life experiences. You both truly are, just full of knowledge in your professions. And I really hope that a lot of people get some takeaways from this, that it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to seek out that help.
Sure.
Whether it be, your battle buddy, or whether it be a therapist, or, whether it be your spouse, whoever it is for you, find that help, get the help you need, put yourself back into, a healthy position, and get back in the fight if need be. So thank you both so much.
Hey, Chris, I would want to tell everybody out there that, we're here 24/7. And if you make one more call, make sure it's to one of us. Doesn't matter where you are or what's going on. Before you take that final step, if you're contemplating suicide, call us. It doesn't matter when, it doesn't matter where we are or what's going on. We want to be there because somebody has been in your shoes before. We understand where you're at, and we would rather help you, no matter what it is, than to go to another suicide or another funeral. So, no matter how bad it is, it doesn't matter if it's personal issues or maybe you made a mistake at work on the job. I mean, things happen. We're only humans. We do make mistakes on occasion, and that's okay too. But that's why we're here. And, our goal is to cut down law enforcement suicide to 0. Not 1, not 2, but 0. And that's our mission. I mean, all the joking aside, the knowledge is there, all of that part is great. But our real goal is to cut that down. You have served your community. Don't go out like that. Let us help. You can get hold of us day or night. Our office number is 386-410-3354. That number is forwarded to our cell phone after hours. Kim also has a direct line as well.
The number to me directly is 386-243-2851, and you can call or text that number.
Day or night. And then, of course, my cell phone, Chris, you have it because you've been putting it up all over bathrooms, all over Port Orange. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
My number is 386-316-7462. I'm not a clinician, but I can get you to one. I'm just a really good listener. Kim and I both have been through the ICISF CISM training, so we're both certified peers as well. So regardless of what's going on, we'd be more than happy to help.
And Kim, can we say the name of your clinic?
Oh, yeah. So our clinic is Wellspring at Port Orange Counseling. Like I said, we just all consolidated into one big office. It's right here next to Hooligans in Port Orange. We're actually in their parking lot. It's at 1400 Dunlawton Ave, Suites 1A and 5E.
And then the secret squirrel entrance is on the north side of the building. Hold one hand on the head, knock twice on your right foot. No, I'm just kidding. We can get you the code for that door. That is a law enforcement only entrance. So that way, once again, you guys can feel comfortable coming in there. Don't expect you to sit in the lobby with everybody else unless you want to. But we did put in a nice special entrance. It's got a great couch in the back. There is a fridge back there with non-alcoholic refreshments.
Yeah.
Just make yourselves at home. But guys, thank you very much for letting us come on. All of the staff at the Wellspring Mental Health Group, the Wellspring at Port Orange Counseling, we're here to serve the community. So even like Kim said, if you don't want to see her, we have a therapist who is a PhD who sees military veterans only. So if you've been in the military, you want somebody who understands what it's like to be in, absolutely, we got that covered. We have a specialist in substance abuse who comes out of law enforcement. She starts in February, so we'll be able to cover that base as well. And what we're trying to do is create a well-rounded practice so we can serve any of the needs of our community, but most especially our law enforcement brothers and sisters.
Thank you both.
So we're both